Hi, my name is Brett Bonomo. I am the founder and president of Castle Rock Microwave.
Good afternoon. My name is Cody Crooks. I'm the Rio Blanco County Communications Director.
Cody, I appreciate you giving your time for this presentation. Um, Castle Rock Microwave, frankly, played a very small part in a huge project to bring rural broadband to Rio Blanco County. But our involvement inspired me to want to make sure that your story and the story of Rio Blanco County was told. So, in today's presentation, a successful story for rural municipal broadband, we are really going to attempt through some questions and discussion to reveal and uncover what we believe is a successful model for a public-private partnership to provide rural broadband in the county. Perhaps it's a playbook for others to follow. We want to focus on your middle mile infrastructure build opposed to a last mile build, how you managed the funding aspect, both funding you received and funding you had, as well as talk about some innovative measures, innovative kind of tips and tricks that you came up with to deploy the network and make it successful. So before we dig into the details, Cody, would you just tell me why broadband in internet access, good internet access, is important to the county and its constituents?
Certainly. Due to the fact of our topography and our location in the state, and being extremely rural, it's always good and important for all of our constituents to be able to continue to have a reliable connection to the rest of the world, especially during this pandemic that we're having. Our broadband network actually became a very vital asset to our constituents during the stay-at-home order that we had in the state, as well as um, the distance learning throughout school when they shut the schools down. We actually had several people, come up to us, several parents that came up to us while we were on the street and saying, "Thank you so much. Tell the county thank you so much for this network." Really allowed us to have our children attend school, even being 30 miles from town. We could still attend school. So it's very crucial that we have that connectivity. We always had um, wanted to have better connectivity in our county, and we never realized the actual importance of it until this pandemic really heightened that importance. As far as public safety goes, our towers that we created throughout our county increased our public safety, our VHF, gave us ability to have several new DTR sites, state digital trunk radio systems, and that increased the public safety for not only our constituents but also for our law enforcement that we have, because we're such a large county and we have so many nooks and crannies. We were able to get further out into those areas. As far as the healthcare during the pandemic, it became really big that everybody wanted to do telehealth instead of actually going into the hospitals. Our network really allowed us to actually do that, and offer that to our constituents, which gave them kind of a peace of mind to be able to still be seen by a doctor without having to leave the comforts of their own home. And so it was very important that we have reliable connectivity, and not just in Rio Blanco County, but across the entire state, across the entire country. It's very important that you have that. Um, Another bonus to us doing this project was our primary towers that are all 100-foot or higher, created some enticing locations for cellular. We really didn't have any cellular companies that were really taking a hard look at Rio Blanco County, um, just because of the lack of population that we have. They just couldn't make a very large profit. So we ended up offering our tower sites, spaces on our tower sites, to the cellular companies below the national average cost. We offer it to them at $100 per foot. Doesn't matter how many dishes they put in that area.
Well,
Whereas the national average is typically $100 per foot per dish. That got T-Mobile looking in to our county. We went from having 3G and some 4G in some locations. Now we actually have 4G LTE because it was a cost savings to those cellular companies. So that also was very vital during this pandemic to a lot of our constituents too, is to increase that cellular coverage.
Absolutely. It's amazing to me how the development of broadband has created so much more opportunity, new business in the community. It's kept people in the community. It's probably even drawn people to the community. It's an impressive thing to say the least. So I want to talk a little bit about the events leading up to Rio Blanco County deciding to embark on building this network. How exactly did the county ultimately decide to do this? What kind of help did it take, or did it take third-party help to evaluate the interest and substantiate the costs that the county is likely going to incur?
Absolutely, it did take the help of a third party. There's multiple companies out there that I would definitely recommend reaching out to. In the event that you're wanting to create your own broadband network within your county, those companies specialize in the just where to get started. They give you that starting point. It's a lot of people that give me a call, a lot of other counties, not only just in Colorado, but also across the country. They say, well, how do we get started? The first thing is you really need to determine, do we need it? And if we need it, how many people are going to use it? Because you don't really want to create something that nobody's going to use, because then you just kind of, as you guys know, wasted your money. But we took a hard look at our SB 152 bill and the votes in our county in favor of that waiver. And we actually had, I think it was 84 or 85% of our county voted in favor of that waiver. So that let us know that, hey, we really need to start looking at broadband. So we took a few ideas and concepts and reached out to these other third party companies and said, hey, this is what we're trying to do. Where do we get started? Fortunately for everybody else that's listening in on this and watching this, there's a lot more opportunities, a lot more available funding for you guys to get started, whereas we kind of were starting from scratch, and there wasn't any federal funding. We did have access from the state, but as far as everything else, that came straight out of our reserves, and that was very very difficult for some of our constituents to actually accept, is that we're about to take $11.5 million out of our reserves to build this network. The third party company basically kind of canvassed the area, and then they took a look at our topography, and they said, okay, so here's what you can do, and get the biggest bang for your buck. It's very important to at least have somebody who understands not just the project management side of it, but the actual infrastructure engineering. You could end up wasting a lot of your money if you don't understand the materials and the products and the engineering behind it. And that's something that we did end up learning in the long run, is there was a lot of things that we could have done differently because everything's kind of trial and error. There was certain products out there that are available now that they weren't available then, to decrease your cost and increase your coverage.
Let's dig in on it. You said a lot of great stuff in there. First of all, I think what makes you such a great guy, so to speak, is your accessibility. So it's worth mentioning to folks that while we're making this quick and there's a lot of information we're covering, feel free to reach out to either of us to ask more specific questions about suppliers, vendors, etc. We can't certainly cover all that here, but you touched on the funding aspect, and that is a tremendously important part. And I think one of the important takeaways is that what allowed this to be successful, part of, or a key enabler, is the fact that, number one, you had capital ready in reserves you could use. But additionally, you did receive DOLA money, correct?
Correct. Yeah, we did receive a $3.5 million 50-50 grant from DOLA.
Right. And anything specific you want to talk about with regards to the mechanics of dealing with the grant money? Anything unique or specific that would be helpful for others to hear?
So I think the most unique thing about that grant that I came across when I came into the middle of this project was the documentation for DOLA. They require documentation for everything. They will not pay for any materials unless it is properly documented and they actually have the proper invoices. Um, when we created our DOLA grant, the original application for the DOLA grant, we did have like a mission statement, and the uh, the mission statement was pretty generic. We knew we wanted to do a broadband, both fiber and wireless, in our county. But as we progressed through the project, we realized that, hey, we needed more funding for this portion of the project instead of the other side. So we ended up going back and requesting an amendment to our actual mission statement so we could get certain things covered under that DOLA grant. That scope of work statement on your DOLA grant is crucial. You want to make sure that you don't miss anything in there. If you do, you have to go through the process of getting an amendment. It has to go in front of their board and get approved. You have to have a very good justification in order to get them to change that and allow you to use the funding to purchase those materials. We ended up doing that twice during our entire project from start to finish. The last amendment was we ended up coming in under budget, and we wanted to do a secondary tower build out, which was not included. And that was when I came in. I realized that we still had some funding left over, and might as well use it while we can. So that was the first thing I had to do with the DOLA grant is create an amendment and also an extension. So it's important to know that DOLA is a fantastic entity to work with. They understand that you need the money and you want to get stuff done in your county, but they also have rules and regulations and red tape that you have to go through, and they have to make sure that you go through it in order to make sure that nobody gets in trouble. So it's always important you have your local DOLA rep to reach out, contact them with any questions whatsoever. They don't care. I thought at first I was being a little annoying because I was new to this and I was new to the process. I wanted to make sure that we weren't violating any of the rules and regulations, and reaching out to those local DOLA reps. That's what they're there for. They answered every single question. They would even help me write the amendment to an extent. They said, I can't tell you what to do, but I would recommend putting this in there. So definitely reach out to them when it comes to your funding. Same thing with the federal funding, USDA, other federal entities out there that offer that. Just reach out to them and talk to them. Most important thing is to get your application in, and then you can work on that application as you get it submitted. You can work on amendments if it wasn't written correctly. Just because you put your application in doesn't mean that, well, that's it, and now you have to start all over if it doesn't work.
Got it. Especially in light of the COVID crisis, I doubt anyone would debate or try to debate the value or the importance of broadband everywhere. But I know that anyone who would embark on a project like this would struggle to understand the sustainability of the network and how do we, yes, of course we can build this and then maybe we even have the money sitting around to do it right now, but how do we make sure that this thing survives? You've shared with us that Rio Blanco County had kind of the cash in hand to get it started. But today, for those that don't exactly have the cash in hand, there's a lot of federal grants. Tell me a little bit about how you quantify the sustainability of the network. For instance, you and I have talked recently that the goal wasn't to make a lot of money. The county can't make a lot of money or make any money maybe. But the success of the network has really truly accelerated the debt recovery and paying off the debt that was created, whether it's back to the county, recovering the costs is what I'm trying to say. you talk a little bit about sustainability?
Certainly. As you mentioned, when we designed this network and decided to move forward and started building, we had no anticipation of making a lot of money. We built this because we knew that our constituents needed it. Currently, the only thing in our county that our constituents had access to inside city limits was CenturyLink or Charter, and most of that was up to 7 megs, and normally got about 4, or in some areas they could only get up to 3, and they got about 1.5. So we knew our constituents were struggling. We did canvass some of the high schoolers on the graduating classes, and then asked them, what's the main reason why you're leaving? And they said, well, there's just no connectivity to the outside world.
Wow.
There's no reason for us to stay here, because we don't want to be stuck in a small town. We want to be able to experience the rest of the world. We want to be able to work remote. And so that really sparked our interest, and we said, okay, well, how about we build this network and see what happens, basically. We built the network, and we built it with a focus on our constituents and not on money and profit. And then what we did not realize is, the more we focused on our constituents, the more our constituents realized that this is a fantastic product. This is a fantastic project. More people wanted on it. So initially, when we started, we built a network for a 40% take rate. And I think it was by the end of the first year, we had around an 81 or 82% take rate right off the bat. And so we had to go back and rebuild out areas that we didn't anticipate, people taking service in. And ultimately, by doing that and not focusing on, we need to make as much money as possible, we made the pricing of our packages extremely affordable, which enticed more and more of our constituents to be on our network. And now we have 70% coverage and a 92% take rate, and we're still growing.
Wow. That's great. Excellent. So an important part of the consideration and the decisions you made early in the process was, instead of becoming a last mile service provider, to focus on what I refer to, and I think you do too, Cody, as the middle mile, or being an infrastructure provider. Can you just tell me quickly how you landed on that decision, and why, even in retrospect, it really is proven to be the right decision?
Certainly. So as far as middle mile and last mile, the county decided that we wanted to promote some local businesses. We did have 2 wireless internet companies in our county at the time, so we wanted to give them the opportunity to grow as well, because if our local businesses are growing, then our county is growing. If they're being profitable, then the county as a whole is being profitable. So we also did not want to get into any PR arguments with our constituents when dealing with end users. That level of customer service, we would have to increase the number of staff for the county in order to provide that level of customer service. So we kind of passed that on to service providers to handle that end user customer service, whereas the county handles all the middle mile and the configuration of the actual broadband equipment. And then we lease that to our service providers at a wholesale cost.
Awesome. And we don't need to walk through each service plan, but just generally, can you talk a little bit about the services you provide, and what the services look like, roughly what they cost? You've compared it to other service providers in past conversations with me, and I think it was helpful to hear.
Yeah, absolutely. So we offer 3 fiber packages. We offer 25, 100, and a gig. And those prices are $40, $55, and $70 respectively. No hidden fees. It's just that's a flat cost. Very, very competitive. And that was actually, those prices have drawn in some families from the cities, where they're wanting to get away from the city life, get away from this pandemic, out in the rural America, and they still needed to be able to work remotely and be affordable. So at $70 a gig, and it is a true gig over gig. We don't throttle. We don't say up to. You get exactly what you're paying for.
Mm.
And then we also offer the wireless to our rural constituents at a flat $50 a month for the wireless, and there is no throttling on that. So the better your alignment, which is what our service providers strive for, is the best alignment gives you the best speeds.
Awesome. So Cody, you've been in that seat, kind of in the driver's seat for 2 or 3 years, right?
Almost 3.
And almost 3. All right. So, and prior to that, I would say the prior regime had more of a philosophy. I mean, everyone was learning as they went. But the idea was to get a subcontractor in place, or a contractor that could take care of all these things. But since you've been in the seat, kind of utilizing your background and being a very hands-on person, you shared with me that it's been extraordinarily helpful to kind of focus more on hiring subject matter experts rather than general contractors to try to own everything. We've talked about this relative to the challenges you've encountered in the planning design stages, but this philosophy of focusing on subject matter experts has saved you a lot of money, made you more efficient. Can you just give me maybe some anecdotes or some more specifics about your decision to go that route and what it meant for the county and a savings?
Absolutely. So when we built out our primary towers, we kind of were looking for, is because we were new at this, we were kind of looking for an entity that was do it all, and so we only had to deal with one entity. What we found is there are entities out there that can do everything, but they do cost quite a bit. So we ended up going with a company that will focus more on our wireless towers at this point. And they've had a focus of tower infrastructure, tower construction, and not as necessarily the electronics. What we found is they said, oh yeah, we could definitely do the electronics. So we'll just do everything for you. And that was the bid that came in. It was a little more because they were doing everything than what we wanted. And we just thought that, okay, that's the norm. And what we ended with is very good tower construction, but the company had never actually installed or deployed any electronics before. So they were learning as they went. And that resulted in a catastrophic failure of one of our tower sites after being struck by lightning. We found that they had ran unshielded cabling up our tower. It's a 130-foot tower, and down into the shelter. It took out all the electronics on the tower, as well as all the electronics inside of our shelter. So with that being said, we kind of went back to the drawing board with moving into the secondary tower project and said, well, how about we try a new angle, and let's focus on companies that specialize in very specific portions of the project that we need, and see if we can all work together. And I know we had some meetings that led us to working with yourself and your crew. And that those meetings, what we gathered in those meetings is that everybody wants to make money. That's the whole point of having a business, but there's wiggle room on everybody's part. And ultimately what we ended up with having a tower constructor or construction crew, and then having Castle Rock Microwave do our electronics, our pathway engineering. Ultimately, we had another company that built our solar sites. That's all they specialize in. And ultimately what we ended up with is a better product, better coverage. So our constituents benefited from that. And it actually ended up saving us money in the long run, to the point where we were actually able to build a whole nother tower. And we were able to build 11 towers instead of just the 10.
Awesome. So let's do a quick recap of what infrastructure you have. You've got fiber in Meeker and Rangeley, right? And just outside of those areas. So you're doing fiber to the home in those areas for people that don't know. You've got a total of 8 primary towers and 11 secondary towers. Is that correct?
Correct. Yes.
Excellent. So that gives folks a scope of the size of the network and the infrastructure. We've talked a little bit in the past. It did require or will require some enhancements to the network, the actual IP network, and core switches and routers. So these things all had to be considered in the process. Cody, now that the system is fully operational, what does it take to run the network day to day as the infrastructure operator?
Day-to-day operation is just constant communication with your service providers. You want to make sure that the network is running at the capacity that we intended it for it to run at. We want to make sure that our service providers, they're basically the voice of our constituents. So we always are reaching out to them. Have open door policy. They can reach out to us at any time saying, hey, here's some things that we have noticed. Here's some things that people are asking about. We'd like to see if that we can get this involved with the network. But because we are the middle mile network operator, and we do all of our own configuration of the broadband equipment, both wireless and fiber. That takes up a lot of our day-to-day operations because we're constantly having disconnects, suspensions, freezing accounts for snowbirds, and new installs. So the county is actually the one who does all of those key functions for the service providers. And ultimately, it just comes down to management and maintaining the network.
So you said 3 people basically, right? And in
Correct.
one of them, you, kind of the director, is very hands-on.
Absolutely. It does require a very specific staff if you want to limit your number of staff. I have a technician that specializes in we have a technician that specializes in fiber splicing and basically the fiber network. I have a technician that specializes in wireless network plus my network engineering, and then I handle all of the day-to-day management and the hands-on. I'm out there every day with my technicians, and that allows us to have that few number of staff members. If you wanted somebody that strictly was behind a desk, you're going to have to hire somebody else in order to make it happen.
So one of the things we haven't unpacked real clearly yet for the listeners is the different roles and responsibilities of the county versus the last mile provider. Can you just quickly run through that with us and just talk a little bit about the point of demarcation and who is responsible for what?
Certainly. So as I stated, Rio Blanco County handles all the configuration of the broadband equipment. Each one of those pieces of equipment, both whether it's an ONT or it's the dish, they have the Ethernet port on them. At that Ethernet port is the demarcation. We do require our service providers to be hands-on truck rolls. They must go on site and conduct troubleshooting steps prior to reaching out to the county. That does keep us available to do the other day-to-day operations that we need to, managing and maintaining the network. But as far as the full troubleshooting, we do work day to day with our service providers, and we are part of that troubleshooting process, whether it is doing light tests on the fiber network all the way back to our data center, or getting involved in doing some remote wireless troubleshooting, spectrum analysis, and so forth like that. That is what the county will do. We don't expect our service providers to do that because that would end up taking up majority of their day and decrease the number of installs that they can do each day.
Awesome. So Cody, in the past we've talked, and today and this is our last question, we've got to wrap up. But you've told me in the past you cover roughly 68% of the population, and you have somewhere around 92% take rate. But you have a vision to cover at least 95%, from 68% of the coverage to
Correct.
98% coverage of the population. What will it take? And today you've roughly got the total cost on the project has been in the range of $14 to $15 million.
Yes.
What will it take to complete your vision to 95% coverage of the population as we wrap?
So our secondary towers that I designed, had Teltec build the engineering behind it. We were able to get those total costs for a total solar site down to about $95,000 per tower. And in order to reach that 95% using reverse engineering, we need, as long as the private landowners are willing to play ball, as well as the Forest Service, we would need about an additional 13 towers. And that would allow us to reach that 94, 95%. So with that being said, at basically $100,000, you're looking at about 1.3 million for our area. But that also depends on your easement costs as well. So full solar, 1.3 million. I would probably look at maybe 2 million for a request for the project just to make sure. And then if we wanted to hardwire a power line to every one of our tower sites that are currently solar, which are all 11 of our secondaries, so it'd be 26 of those secondary towers. We'd be looking at probably roughly about 3 million.
Wow. You just touched on something. We can't end on that note because we missed such an important
Oh,
part of the conversation. And part of our abstract is an innovative approach to maneuvering, permitting, and zoning. So let's end it on this because
sure.
it's something that admittedly I was skeptical of the prospect or the concept of these temporary towers. And it turned out to be, right next to the funding piece. If you guys have money in the bank, probably the second most important thing of making this project happen on time and under budget are these temporary towers. So can you just talk quickly about what
Certainly.
they were and the efficiencies they created in working through zoning with BLM and others?
So our primary towers cost us roughly 300 to 500,000, and we knew that we needed to get more coverage for the same amount of money that we had, which was $1 million. So I went to the drawing board and was looking at different options instead of putting in these permanent towers that have the concrete foundations. So I reached out to our local BLM office, which I highly recommend you do. Because even though the federal agencies and state agencies have a lot of red tape, the local representatives for those entities, they understand because they live there that this is something that absolutely needs to happen.
Right.
So working with them, we were able to find not necessarily loopholes. It's never good to use that term in government, but we found some easier ways
Creativity.
and creativity. Yes, and we were able to determine that if as long as the tower wasn't penetrating the ground, at least on the BLM land, as long as it wasn't penetrating the ground, then we didn't have to do soil samples. We didn't have to um, do certain NEPA studies because we didn't have to dig. So we came up with this design, or I came up with this design with Teletech, that let's do what's called a mobile tower site or a temporary tower site, which is just a skid plate, steel skid plate with a small tower on it, and it has some guy wires because the anchors, the guy wire anchors weren't really considered as a penetration
Right.
into the ground. And ultimately, we ended up taking that red tape that was somewhere between 6 months to 2 years, and we were able to blow through it in about 4 months. And that was
Awesome.
just because reaching out to those local representatives and just talking to them, telling them this is what we're wanting to do. How can we do it faster? And then ultimately, with the height of the tower, yes, you don't get as high, but you were able to build more and get more coverage in those areas as long as you get creative with your topography. So I reached out to the FAA and I was asking them, what is your guys' restrictions? Because we have to get a name, or a signal identifier for those tower sites. And they said, well, pretty much anything over 50 feet comes into our airways. So we do need to have an identifier for those tower sites. Our planning department said anything over 50 feet requires a planning permit. And then we have to go through and make sure that it's not going to obstruct the view of the neighbors. But if it's below 50 feet on both the FAA and our planning department, it was a quick write-off. So
Right.
that's what led us to having a 20-foot and 40-foot towers and not going any higher. And we didn't even have to go near that red tape.
Awesome. Well, listen, our time is up. This was great. I seriously appreciate your time,
Absolutely.
and I appreciate your passion for what you do, Cody. It's fun. It's one of our corporate tenets to impact our community and communities, and it was fun to be involved in the project where we could help make a difference in Rio Blanco County. But I applaud you and your team and the county for all their hard work.
Thank you.
I appreciate your time today, Cody, and have a great day, man.
Absolutely. And anybody that is listening to this, like Brett said, do not hesitate to reach out to me. We'll be including my email address. If you have any questions at all, just even any guidance that you need or just where to start, please don't hesitate. I'm available at all hours.
Thank you.
So,